All right, it is with great pleasure to introduce Chris from Wave. He's a cheminformatician with 10 plus years experience building data management systems, decision support solutions with chemical data. He's now focused on leading a team using agile principles and methodologies in both software development and scientific endeavors. With a focus on transparency, defined processes, and constant improvement driven by data, Chris enjoys working with these teams to provide scientists with the key data insights that they need and visualization to drive efficient decision-making. So without further ado, Chris is going to be talking to us today about development of Oligo synthesis and formulation protocols in Dotmatics using Scrum. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you. So that was a lot of words. I am pretty informal in my interactions, so if at any point during this presentation you want to interrupt me, please do. I've got way too many slides anyways, particularly with our time crunch, so I'm going to be cutting through them pretty fast. I am a product owner, Scrum product owner, trained through the Scrum Alliance, and I came about that when I started working at the EPA, and the technical leads on the team were running Scrums. And they were like, well, you know about science and you're doing cheminformatics work, and we're trying to build software related to chemistry. Go take some product ownership classes. And it really transformed the way that I think about doing work and the way I think about doing software. Today I'm going to be talking about a particular case where a problem was identified at Wave, and some issues were brought up, and they started a project to try and solve that problem. That project ran into a whole bunch of bumps during the implementation. And as part of fixing those bumps, I managed to come in and I think be a little bit helpful in trying to get through those issues. So, Wave's IT research landscape. Wave is a small biotech company, well, medium-sized, 250 clinical stage. We've got 100 people in the research domain at Wave, and those people have only a limited amount of IT capability support that can be given to them because we're not that big. So what IT was providing to chemists, biologists, scientists was really three solutions. There was Dotmatics, which was used for all our small molecule management and our small molecule inventories, as well as our ELNs. There was the Fugu system, which was a custom-made PHP application, which handled registration of oligo concepts, oligomer concepts, as well as handled sort of the process by which requests would come in from project teams, and those oligos would get synthesized, formulated, and sent back out to the project teams to do their screening. And then KNIME for capturing the results of biological experiments in a structured format and enabling processing of them. This simple landscape already had problems. There were clear break lines between the systems, and communication between the systems was not very effective, leading to data being duplicated. The ELN notebooks that were used for capturing the biological assays were also having the same data captured again in KNIME, in workflows, and the small molecule information that you need to know and understand in order to drive the syntheses of oligomers was being captured only in Dotmatics, but our Fugu system had no communication with Dotmatics for interacting with that. So there were a lot of pressing concerns. Duplication of storage was one of them. Poor data communication was another. In addition, the Fugu system was a custom-made PHP application. It had been written back in 2014, 2015. It was maintained only by a single developer who was the only person who understood the code. That person, by the way, was not in IT and was no longer in data science. They were in data science for a while, but they had moved into biology. And the oligo storage format that was being used was a proprietary format, which was designed at Wave. It could not interact with any other systems. And so we were really looking to move it to a global standard Helm. Our Dotmatics infrastructure was primarily, the ELNs were basic document stores. People uploaded PowerPoints, Excels, whatever they wanted, but there was no structured formatting of the data. So looking at this landscape in 2021, our leaders in IT and data science decided, well, let's try and solve this Fugu problem first, because we're not sure if it's going to fall over at any point in the next year or two. We better try and figure out how we're going to maintain this in a more effective way. So with that plan to deal with the Fugu issue and synthesis and formulation, we really, the focus was on one of two solutions. Either rebuild Fugu from start as a custom application, which had some pros. The user interface in Fugu was great. The scientists loved it. They always said, built by scientists to service the scientists. So they really, really loved that application and the way that it presented data to them, the way it captured the data that they cared about in synthesis, in formulation. The chemical knowledge in it was great. We would be able to maintain all of that functionality and also provide the latest architectures, but there were some cons. We didn't have developers that really understood what was going on, so we would have to hire a bunch of developers, which has high cost. The idea of that rebuild probably would have taken in custom code between 18 months and 2 years with 2 developers, which was what we could potentially afford. And still, then you've got custom code, which then maintaining it is difficult. So we decided to go with the Fugu to Dotmatics transition instead, which has a standardized system. It's configuration driven. It had capabilities inside it that were important for us. So it has bioregister, which is driven by Helm. Studies with its level of flexibility would enable us to start capturing the structured data that we're capturing in Fugu. There were some cons. It has some limited UI features, which the scientists were not so pleased with. And we could not do Oligo visualizations in the way that they were used to, which was key to them and the way that they did SAR. We ended up supporting that with a sort of ripping out portions of the PHP into a little API. Not going to go into that in more detail, but if you want to know, we could talk about that more. So we had Dotmatics being supported by Ziffo, and so the first step was we interacted with Ziffo and we asked them to bring in a business analyst to help us map out the business pathways. What you have here is a significantly dumbed down version of a really, really complicated Visio diagram that was crafted by our Ziffo business analyst. Scientists put in requests, admins route the requests to different teams that do the syntheses. Those different syntheses teams have multiple different paths of synthesis that they can go down. Each one has different requirements around which fields should be captured, which data needs to be stored, what's required, what's optional. And so there's a lot of complexity in the flow of what needs to happen once you decide you're going to synthesize something. In addition, formulation has a fairly similar structure to it because we deal with both DSRs, SSRs. We've got in vivo and in vitro formulations that we manage. So again, you have a request. You have to check in inventory if there's something that's been synthesized that you're going to be able to formulate into what you want. Admins route the request to particular analysts in this case. The analysts do the formulations using multiple different potential paths, each of which have different data requirement capture. So we got to this point where we had sort of the workflow understood, and the team started implementation. And the team at that point, when we started implementation, consisted of leadership in Wave IT and Wave Data Science, the heads of both departments, the Ziffo business analyst who had sort of generated the diagrams and the Visio work streams, And then 2 Ziffo developers that were assigned to the task that we brought in to do the actual implementation and configuration in Dotmatics that would end up supporting the functionality that we needed. The implementation strategy was very waterfall. A requirements document was written, which had 150 rows in it of things that were needed. By the end of this project, after I came in and we transferred it into Jira, it had more than 1,500 tickets in Jira user stories. They were tracking everything in Excel, just one spreadsheet with the with sort of categories, like probably around 15 categories of different things that they wanted and when they wanted them delivered. And I decided that wasn't sufficient for my needs, so we started doing road mapping in Jira as well. They were meeting on a weekly basis, a meeting of about 20 to 25 individuals each week. And those 20 to 25 individuals included members of Ziffo, the leadership in IT, and then the wide array of business stakeholders, because ripping out the entire registration system for your drugs is a very impactful change for an organization. And because of this implementation strategy, there were a lot of problems being brought up. A difficulty to make decisions, a hard time getting to the actual requirements that the Ziffo team needed in order to do their development. There were other people problems too. We had some user adoption issues with the ELN previously. The breadth of the impact was very scary for our stakeholders. There's a whole bunch of technical problems that we encountered along the way, but I'm not really going to go into those. They're listed here if you want to come and talk to me about issues that we had with the technology itself. So I arrived in July of 2021, and the first thing I did was say, okay, I'm going to be product owner for this, which definitely scared the data science and IT leadership a little bit, because they were handing over a lot of responsibility. This was a very important program for our IT and data science groups. And so when I came in and they barely knew me and I was like, I'm going to handle everything, just stay out of the room and let me talk to people. They got really, really uncomfortable for like the first month. But I put in place a sort of a structure where all the business adoption team, which was the series of stakeholders that were going to be in charge of using this, would come to me with their needs. I would make sure those were documented in fine enough detail that the developers and I could communicate about them and define clear acceptance criteria for what they were going to build. Those clear acceptance criteria would result in functional capabilities being moved into the test environment that then the business adoption team could work with, see, interact with. Give me a go-ahead to start pushing functionality out into our prod environment, which is what we would do. And then as we rolled out sections of functionality, the business would be able to start picking them up and provide additional feedback beyond what the original set of stakeholders could do. We moved to a fairly standard Scrum model. We weren't perfect, but implementing a daily stand-up worked wonders for us. Getting a person that could spend that amount of time talking to the dev team and defining the decisions that were right for the organization on the Wave side was key to being able to move the process forward and not providing a blocker to the developers who have been great in crafting potential solutions for us. We also ended up bringing in a Scrum Master about 6 months after I arrived, who completely improved the process that I sort of threw together based on my limited product owner knowledge. So I recommend Scrum Masters if you're actually going to run Scrum. And then we sort of outlined who the stakeholders were. We had a lot of different levels of representation throughout the organization. And what I needed was to really have one point person who sort of stood at the front of each of the different business units we had in research and would act as my liaison, capture the information, capture the key knowledge from their group, and then allow me to sort of meld that knowledge that came from all the groups into a single cohesive product vision. So we did all these things, and that fixed a lot of our people problems. We managed to get our first release out, which ended up being this monstrosity of Dotmatics protocols, Dotmatics browser projects, working with Cascade and Inventory and BioRegister. I think we may have written as much SQL as it would have taken to write an entire program on my own in Python, but we managed to figure out how inside Dotmatics we could make this workflow system, which last year there was a Dotmatics user group meeting where they were like, yeah, we're not really into these types of complicated workflows. That's not what we're made to handle at this point. Would have been good to know that before I started this project. But we managed to get this up in about 6 months was our initial release, and then we spent about 4 to 5 months optimizing it afterwards to provide the best capabilities for the user groups, particularly tweaking the custom schemas that are documented here and here for storing sort of a centralized set of formulation data instead of leaving that data tightly attached to the structured ELNs that was in. We ship everything back into a centralized schema. I could show you these, but they're really, really not exciting. They're fairly simple Dotmatics ELN protocols. There's a lot of complexity in this analyst protocol and the different tabs, which I'm not allowed to show you. Our IP group forbid me describing in detail what's going on in these processes or the data we're capturing. But for each different path, those additional tabs change. So we've got probably 10 to 15 variants of the synthesis tab, of the purification tab, of the desalt tab, which are specific to different pathways that our scientists follow. So, you guys didn't interrupt me at all, which I'm pretty disappointed about. But I've got a few insights that I learned during this process, or were reinforced during this process. When you're building complex scientific software, or you're trying to transition complex scientific software, you need to be thinking agilely. The main feedback that I got from the scientists that we were working with was what made the change effective for them was being able to get hands on the system as quickly as possible and provide feedback that would actually impact development. If you're running in the process of waterfall that was in place, it had been 3 or 4 months before I arrived where work was ongoing, but they didn't have hands on a system where the people in the labs could say, no, that system's not going to work for me. So requirements at a high level and then not actually touching that real system will cause a lot of consternation with your partners. And we fought through that consternation. Every development team needs someone who can dedicate a significant proportion of their time to making decisions about what's good enough and what's not good enough. And we were at a point when they started the project where there wasn't that person available. That resource didn't exist inside Wave. And so I don't know if we were hoping that maybe the business analyst could serve that role, but it's really hard for an external business analyst to be the one making decisions about what the final product looks like. And finally, when you are building Dotmatics studies protocols, there's a lot of challenges to think about in regards to how big and complicated you make a single protocol versus breaking it into smaller protocols. And I don't really have very many good answers there. We ended up with a really, really big synthesis analyst protocol with a huge number of forms sitting underneath it. And the users like it, so I guess that's good. Make your users happy, even if you think the process should be a little bit different technologically. All right, there were a lot of people that helped with this project, members of Wave IT and data science, a whole series of stakeholders in the business, the business analysts that came from Ziffo, along with the development and support team that we have for Dotmatics. And that's all I got. Any questions?
It's Chris. Of course, you're in the furthest part of the room.
So Chris, this good story, actually a very common story, I think. After this effort, do you think it's worth it?
That's a difficult question. So if I had to do it over, we needed to make a change. I'm not sure that I would have made this change at this time. So there were piping solutions that we could have done underneath these systems that I think would have been more efficient for transferring the data around. In terms of the concerns regarding security and the old PHP custom code, I think that we would have been better off leaving it alive and slowly transitioning it into a different architecture, pulling out individual pages at a time, and replacing them with something like React sitting on top of a microservice backend for entity management. That's the path that I think I would have gone down if I had been there when decision-making was happening. But we had already started along the Dotmatics train. I think that you need to recognize what Dotmatics is really good at when you're deciding what you're going to do in Dotmatics. And Dotmatics really has a great capability in standardized, well-understood protocols that are going to be repeated, building that data capture for you. This, particularly in oligomer chemistry, was very customized at the end of the day. And so we still have a lot of custom code, it's just custom SQL code.
That's right. So correlated to that is, I'm a bit surprised you did not use Dotmatic assay result system, which is actually their strength, I think, which you use KNIME. So that's where the second question I have for you.
Right.
Are you consider use that to actually capture the assay? Because then you have everything in one place.
We are. So the next stages are now that we actually have the oligomers, the samples, the batches, the complexes, the oligomer complexes registered into Dotmatics, we can build in the validation into Dotmatics forms to initiate appropriate structured data captures. And so we're doing that by taking our biologists, mapping out their workflows, trying to build individual units that'll service their needs. So that is the next stage. Yeah. So I'm looking on getting that good payoff for all of this hard work. About 6 to 8 months from now, we're going to be rolling out our first sets of biology-focused ELNs, probably early in the summer into a production context.
Thanks, Chris. I had a question on the use of agility and the whole concept of agile team that you brought in here. So you arrived there, you formally train as a PO. That's great, makes complete sense for you. How did you get the team to get into this mindset and this routine? Did you embark on a onboarding session, hardcore training? Did you just go organically? What was the approach to make sure that they didn't get scared off by all the terminology of agile in the process?
So I think the answer to that is I started by saying, okay, your requirements aren't good enough. We're going to start writing requirements in Jira, and we're going to track them in Jira. And like, once you start moving in the direction, you do that agilely as well. So we instituted a daily stand-up, essential for effective communication between the developers and the people that are going to be looking at their data, which in this case as product owner is me. I need to know where you're at on each ticket. You need to only be working on one ticket at a time that has clear acceptance criteria. Like, these things are pretty simple, and developers, once you start them on that path, almost always are like, yeah, this is great. Because what is most, I've done a lot of development too, and what's most uncomfortable as a development as a developer is where you're trying to build something for someone, but you have no idea what they want. And if your requirements are too high, that gives you a lot of room to Imagineer solutions, which then is okay if when you take it back to people, they're like, okay, that's good, I like that. Instead of them saying, no, you completely went down the wrong path, you didn't understand what I want at all. That's what was happening before I arrived. They would come with solutions and it'd be like, no, you didn't understand this and this and this are missing, and without them, it's completely dysfunctional. So it worked pretty well, I think, making that transition slowly, going through requirements gathering or detailed requirement gathering and agreement between the developers and me as product owner as to what was going to be built, including pictures, mock-ups, things that gave them something to code to. The team was quite pleased with the changes that we ended up making. Even before going to like the full Scrum 2-week thing, we were doing that in sort of like a daily stand-up and ad hoc sort of structured way. Once the Scrum Master came in and instituted retrospectives, I got a whole earful of things that we should have done better and differently by her providing that safe space. But at least something where you're doing iterative work, you're communicating frequently, and you're writing down the solutions that you're expecting in detailed formats is a great first step, even if you're not doing a full Scrum methodology.
Thank you.
Nice presentation, Chris. Thank you. Love Scrum, love Agile. But the question I have around, like, do you have to go through some GXP processes as well? Because when you do Agile...
Thankfully, no. Yes, no GXP for me. I've come across some people that are doing GXP and trying to work with Agile, but the QA train ends up being like sprints behind the development train. So you do the development, and then you've got a separate QA team that does the QA. I think that it's a really challenging area to integrate that all into one sprint because there's just so much work that needs to be done. You could work with extended sprints, but what you're thinking there then would be the QA people are the developers because Scrum is crafted around teams that are cross-functional. So I don't have a good answer for you, but if you're in that domain and you want to talk about it, I'm always happy to talk.
So we are trying to do that, and I think, so the reason I asked this question, I think sometimes when you do these Agile and Scrum and the waterfall kind of, for me, GXP kind of still follows waterfall because you have to go through some gate approaches and approvals and all that. So I think what you described works well. When you're building in increments, you take it to a point where it's ready for demo, you're ready for UAT and all that, and then validation kicks in. So basically, you do scrums in multiple sprints, but towards the end, you kind of, when you think it's good to go, take through GXP and validation. It does slow things down, but unfortunately, that's the way it has to be done. So.
Yeah, so I think that the push to production context may end up having to be fall. There were definitely portions of what we were doing that was more Scrum fall than Scrum. We are doing Scrum now where we push product increments on a 2-week basis. But we were crafting large sets of functionality and then they were falling out, on a 2-month to 3-month basis, because we had to replace old capabilities with the new capabilities, and there were certain checkpoints that you had to reach. I think that you've got similar ways you could handle that in GXP space with the validation that has to occur. But what's key is to have then a great test environment and have partners who are willing to go into that test environment. That was a challenge for us, getting our partners in the business to really accept, hey, it's part of your responsibility to tell me that it's bad before I say I'm going to roll it out. Like, take a look at it. Spend an hour on it. I know that you've got a lot of busy stuff going on in the labs, But this is a key responsibility and part of our relationship and partnership in order for us to provide you the product you need.